thesis statement is a one-sentence summary of the writer's argument. It has one main point to be supported by solid evidence and reasoning. See an example below. The first step in writing a thesis statement is choosing a topic. For example, say you want to write about violent video games and children. The second step is to brainstorm keywords related to your topic and do preliminary research. So I used app search and the keywords children, violent video games. I'm limiting to just articles. After looking at some of the results, I can start to ask myself some questions. For example, some questions could be, does playing violent video games have a positive effect on children's social skills? Or, does playing violent video games make children behave aggressively? The next step would be to pose an answer to one of the questions. This would be your thesis statement. For example, if I chose my second question, does playing violent video games make children behave aggressively? My thesis statement could be, playing violent video games causes children to behave more aggressively. You now have a working thesis statement, and you would continue to do research to help support your assertion. To recap, the steps are:
and the second three parts, the backing, rebuttal, and qualifier, are the secondary components because they supplement the primary ones. The Toulmin model is often represented visually in this way in order to illustrate how each of the 6 elements relates to and depends on each other. As you can see, the warrant sits between the evidence and the claim, but is put in parentheses because the warrant in many arguments is often left as an unstated assumption instead of being explicitly drawn out. Here we have a sample argument put into the scheme. You can see that our claim is that cars over 20 years old shouldn't be allowed on the road, and our evidence for why this is the case is because older cars pollute more and are less safe than new cars. The warrant, or assumption that ties our claim and evidence together, is that removing older cars would result in a cleaner environment and fewer accident-related injuries and deaths. While this warrant may be pretty obvious and thus not necessary to spell out in this argument, this is not the case for every other argument or warrant. In this example, our rebuttal is that not all older cars bear the same responsibility for pollution and danger, so we can qualify our claim to take this rebuttal into account by allowing that some older cars may be acceptable and that putting limitations of use on old cars may be more reasonable than completely disallowing their use. Notice especially that if this were an argument being made for an academic essay, the warrant and the backing would be the primary source of discussion because these are the parts of the model that most depend on factual or hard data, so these would be the places where researched information could be used to support this argument. Essentially, these are the aspects of the Toulmin model that make your argument for you and that they hold up your claim and evidence against scrutiny. Without these aspects, you force your audience to connect these dots for you. The Toulmin model helps in the composition of arguments for these reasons. It asks you to think beyond, above, below, and against your own argument. That is, you cannot have completely employed the Toulmin model for your argument without putting your own claims to the test first. Furthermore, since the scheme is built upon an inherently logical structure of rational questioning, you can be sure that your argument uses reason, if sometimes even to analyze irrational situations. The Toulmin model is just as useful for analyzing arguments made by others as it is for creating them yourself. For instance, look at this advertisement here for a 1967 Ford Mustang. If we can determine the answers to these 6 questions, that is, if we can fill in the Toulmin model, we will know a lot about how this argument has been built, both in terms of its successes and its faults. In this example, where would the boxing glove image and phrase, "strike a blow," fall into the Toulmin scheme? If it is evidence, what warrant connects it to the primary claim of the ad, which we can assume is buy a Mustang, or at least think about buying a Mustang? Is there not some kind of implied violence in the use of the boxing glove image? Do you think this warrant is intentional? Also notice the subtle qualifier in the text at the bottom of the ad, which reads, "Still the original and lowest priced car of its kind with bucket seats." We can probably assume this was a necessary qualifier because there were probably cheaper cars of the Mustang's kind that came with bench seats only instead of bucket seats. So while they can't say cheapest car overall, they can say cheapest car of its kind with bucket seats. Nonetheless, there are limitations to what the Toulmin model can do for you in the creation and analyzation of arguments. Largest among these limitations is the fact that this is a model or outline of a possibly complete argument. That is, you cannot simply take the text produced in a Toulmin model example and put them into paragraph form and have a good academic essay. Instead, think of the model as a heuristic or problem-solving tool to help you work toward a complete essay, not the method for writing the essay itself. Thank you for watching this Toulmin tutorial, and I hope you find it helpful in analyzing and composing future arguments.